I really felt that for my entire education in China, I only had experience to learn math and science and technology. But you definitely have this feeling that there's another world of liberal arts that's not belonging to you. So at the time, I made a decision, like, in order to educate myself as a person, I need the other side. So that's why, among other schools, I picked art school. Yeah, I did. I think that was also interesting coincidence between the personal choice and like the trend globally at the time, because I feel like people start to have this personal urge to know more or something else. Well, at the same time, educational institutions, they also are starting to be more interested in having students with a diverse background. So I feel like that's kind of like why they picked me and why I picked them. I think it came kind of naturally. When I was in RISD, we have to make work, make projects, and I'm not the best painter in school. So I started to think about what am I good at? What are the questions I tend to ask more than other people? And then I think art is really a process of looking back at who you are and who are interested. Then, once that process starts, what I dig out is something in between art and science and technology. Mm, absolutely. I think um, there's something about art for me is really its storytelling aspect. Science is beautiful. For me, like sometimes the equation is beautiful, but that's like a mental game that only shared with a limited community. But once you can personal, then we reach to the territory of art. And that's why other people could be more excited about what you're doing. And it's always about sharing and finding the language that the public can access. Really good question again. So for me, it's always that the starting point, the question for me is always philosophical, artistic. But then anything actually, even like any question that could be scientific at the same time. If an artist whose story is about what is love, like scientists could also dig into that just from a different way. So that's how I start working in this area often. Is the starting point of this project is really about how do we perceive ourselves. And that could be a pure art piece about finding your own identity. Or in my case, is the idea of like how the feedback from different sensory stimulation could form the idea of who I am. Like right now I'm talking to you, I can hear my own voice, and that's how I think what I am. But if one day my voice tends to be something which much deeper or sounds like a man, how does it change the way I think who I am or who am I in this world? So that's where I came from. But then slowly, when you get deeper into those questions, science plays in a big position, and technology start to be my tool to kind of twist and play. So I have to say, like, it's really half and half. Technology is more like the tool I use, and then the art, I have to say, is maybe like the origin of the ideas. But in the end, they merge again when you have to present them. So for this work, I have exhibitions, I have storytellings, I'm also working on academic paper for it. I think it started with philosophical questions I'm interested in. And slowly, especially for the past 2 years, I realized it actually is much more interesting when other people are also into what you're thinking about, and you have this kind of exchange, and you develop idea with a much bigger community. So nowadays, I will try more to bridge what I'm thinking with things that other people care about. So for example, my research topic in MIT is about the perception of self. It sounds like a pure philosophical question, but at the same time, it's very realistic and practical. For example, like if you think about marketing, most of the time, the decision you made to buy something or you think you need something is not necessarily coming from you, but coming from outside. And for me, that's the interesting point, the idea of like, what is the idea that you decide, or the separation between one and the other. Or on the other hand, we have all this problem in the world between separations, different genders, different race, different nationalities, but where do you cut the line? So for me, the perception of self can actually also be expanded to much broader context, more practical context than just a philosophical game. The project started with the idea of like, how do we have a new kind of interplanetary body, because our limbs and the way we walk, the way we function is not going to work up there. We're disabled. So I'm trying to imagine a new way of moving around. But then through the process of developing it, because it is a problem on the to be honest, it's also actually a thing that we have to worry about at some point. That this body we're inhabiting is not going to work if we want to live in Mars for a long time. So somehow I found it does have certain practical use. Maybe not for now, because we don't even have a space shuttle that is so big you can just travel through it or need to do that. We design a space shuttle in a way that you can grab next to you, just pull yourself a little bit. But maybe in the future for spacewalking, then that's something could be really interesting. Or on a smaller scale, instead of making it for human, can we make like a little, almost like a drone or robot that navigate in space? Instead of flying, they use like this kind of spider way of movement. Yeah, so as you just said, like that VR work tree is also about how we perceive ourselves. So I found VR is a really perfect platform that our own identity could be altered and changed for a new possibility. So that's why I was thinking, okay, what can we turn ourselves into? And tree is just in an honest way, it's one of the easiest things you could do at the beginning. So I was like, okay, let's start with that and see how it goes, because I care more about it actually has a working system that has like very detailed operation that makes sense for people, rather than like a crazy idea at the beginning but no one actually felt anything. And in terms of how VR is going to play an important role in the future, I had a like complicated feeling about that. So at the beginning, I actually personally is not very comfortable wearing the headset for too long. My eyesight is slightly different between my two eyes. So I always feel like, yeah, it's interesting, but more for 5 minutes. And then what changed me is like actually when we first premiered Tree at Sundance, and the first audience who actually tried it, the entire piece, she came out of the experience crying. And I was very shocked. I did not expect the work as such an effect on a person. So for me, that's the point that I start to understand, like maybe the reality could be something more exciting or more connected, or something we can really share with other people through this platform. And of course, VR still have a long way to go, but it is definitely having a lot of potential. But at the same time, I think reality is probably the actual thing we need to care about. Absolutely. There are several reasons. First of all, I think lots of the problem brought by technology nowadays we argue about or worry about has to do with that the people who are making them are not fully aware of the potential harm of technologies. And just from my own experience, I have a much different perspective of the world after I went to the art school. I understand why we would do something for the beauty of it, and then that's what you don't really learn in an engineering school, because in engineering school you're solving the problem. In science, a different situation because you're more about discovery. But in engineering, you're already in a position to conquer, to solve. And often, of course, you're helping. But there is another possibility of living is to live with something. I think that's what art teaches us, and it's very important. Yeah, I think at least from what I know, lots of universities in United States are working on that, like CMU, for example, and in the other side of the world, in China, where I did my undergrad in Tsinghua University, actually we had a double like second major in arts for all the engineering students if you're interested in taking. So it is like still relatively like small scale. It's not like every single school has such a program, but I feel like the media is doing a great job at promoting this kind of work and possibilities. So even though not all the school have the programs, I feel like the students themselves are very excited about those possibilities. I got a lot of emails from everywhere in the world, from like undergrads to say they're interested in the combination of art and technology, and it's very exciting. Definitely, they sometimes like why this is matter, or they sometimes say, oh, this is artwork, then they just consider it as something, whatever you want to do, and they just to help you out, so they kind of opt out for the actual creative process. They're not like, they're helping but not collaborating, which is not what I want. But I think that's not something just like as a problem in like engineering school. It's a problem between any disciplines. Like if a poet comes in and say they want to write a poetry, and then we might be, oh, sorry, I'm not like a literature person. There's this fear about like you're not fully aware of the expertise of the others, or where this gap of knowledge. But what I realize is, luckily, because of my own engineering background, I like better, or at least so far I've tried to speak their language first, and then slowly get it into the other side of the story, why the other things matter. And in a way, like make more like a positive comment on here is like, in fact, if you really have a conversation with someone, in the end, they actually will agree, will be part of your team. Because if it's a good project, if it's art, like art that actually moves someone, and those are everyone is people, and they feel that the need to create something like that. So I think that's just a process, like from both sides. We both need to like lowering down a little bit, and then trying to think about why and how to think and talk from the other side. Well, it's changing it dramatically already. So like the creative the creation of virtual reality, like you would just talk about like a film, like with cameras, we shaped painting for decades and still. So technology and engineering are creating the tools for us to perceive the world, and our ability to say things is really the beginning of how we can understand it and make art out of it. So I think it is always at the foundation of how art is made and produced throughout history. Yeah, I do agree. I think art has this characteristics that engineers might benefit from, such as the willingness to be uncertain. It's a little bit more like science, like for artwork. So for example, if you see a painting, an abstract painting, for example, or like right now in a room, there's certain color composition, and you walk in, you feel good about it. But it's not like this formula is what works for you. There's uncertainty. And I think in engineering, we need that too. It's not everything can be calculated. There's a limit for calculation or measurement in order to achieve something. And in a way, like for us, we need to embrace this blurry fact of nature. And also in art, I think we are more willing to accept errors or like the fault, especially the fault from people ourselves. But in science or like in engineering, I think that's often the part we don't want to look at. But there's often surprises and innovations and possibilities in those areas. So just from this too, I feel like art gives engineering and science a new perspective and definitely helps with a lot of thinking before we step into a certain direction of creation. Like for example, if we watch a science fiction movie and talking about artificial intelligence, then that's already something really so provocative that we would start thinking about before we actually build the machine that might go wrong or right. Yeah. I have to say, I've been very lucky because at least several projects we just talk about all my projects from MIT Media Lab, which is this unique institution that provide very privileged resources for their researchers and students to be able to realize their projects. But outside of MIT, I have been working way harder in order to get my work funded. And it's also something I'm trying to figure out nowadays, that what is the value of a project that's inspiring, that is interesting, that people like, but you cannot buy it off the shelf. Like what are the other economic models that could be possible for creators and artists and researchers that is not necessarily focusing on like commercial products. There are possibilities nowadays, especially in US and Europe. There are lots of fundings and grants for people like us, but I have to say it's never enough, and also it's highly competitive, and I feel like it's complicated situation that you have to fight against your fellows in order for one of us project to be realized. Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, it's not as expensive as you thought. It's cheaper than lots of things people are doing. So for example, the parabolic flight, if you have a research institution for one researcher, is about, I'll give it like a rough number, don't quote me here, like 4K. And for 4K, for lots of people or like fancy business travelers, that's just a flight. So I don't think so. I don't think it is that expensive. So that's the first misunderstanding we can get rid of. And second, still, it's not that cheap. I cannot afford it out of my pocket. However, I think there is an exciting part about space. So if I talk about some crazy art idea about buildings or traffic or body health, people would definitely first question is like the market potential of it. But space somehow has this power with dreams embedded inside of it. I think it's much easier to convince people to help you work on projects about space, even though it doesn't provide you commercial outcome right away. Yeah, but for us in MIT Media Lab, we are working with lots of different companies, and from our own research funding, we're decreasing the price as much as possible for all our researchers. So that's why we are able to support projects, and especially we cover the missions. So like maybe we cannot support your project particular, but we'll cover your flight. So that means at least you got an opportunity to go up there. I think once that step is done, there's always more people coming in and be able to help you slowly. It's never a process that you got $1 million funding right away. We tend to work with like starting with something and then build the reputation and make people feel more confident about what we're doing, and then we grow from there. It sounds like a joke to me. It's very interesting for Space Force. Space Force is like, it sounds like a joke in some way. I'm Chinese, so I don't even like consider his like argument around Space Force as something relevant of what we're doing nowadays. But I know politics is much more complicated, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. The good news is I think NASA is still doing its job. Yeah, so I have actually another 2 space launch coming up next year. So I'm sending a robotic sculpture around this big to perform something a little bit like the orbit weaver spider-like movement, a choreography dance in zero gravity this coming January, hopefully. And so the whole sculpture will be sent to the suborbital space and it will perform there. I think it will probably be one of the few, or if it's not the only, dance performance you can see up there in space. And later on, we also have another project potentially with ISS. And once that's confirmed, we'll release more information. Yeah.